Just a little bit of housekeeping to get started. Everybody on the call, with few exceptions, is muted. We do that to allow the workshop to go through. We just ask that questions be held until the end, and that you raise your hand, you'll be asked to unmute. And I think Stephanie indicated 2 minutes to speak. Please keep your comments in the chat relevant to the content that we're talking about here in the workshop. And if you need to direct message one of the hosts or co-hosts, you may do so. Otherwise, all chats go to everybody. Thanks again for being here this evening and for expressing some interest in this important topic. At this time, I'll turn it over to the committee chair, Stephanie Berk.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad you're joining us tonight. I'm thinking we might still have a few people who will be joining in as the meeting continues. I know there have been some technical difficulties, so thank you for your patience. This indeed is the ASCC meeting. ASCC stands for Accessibility and Special Circumstances. I like to call us the Can-Do Committee. Honestly, having worked on several committees and being part of several boards and everything else, whenever you have a committee that really works well together, you kind of have to take a minute to say, oh, thank goodness, and run with it and get everything done that you can get done. And I feel very fortunate that we have an amazing committee with people who are genuinely interested in the topic and in helping chess players, tournament directors, organizers, and coaches really achieve something with US chess so that more and more people can have a seat at the same table. Sorry. There we go. Current committee members. I like to go through who's who. I am the chair right now. Judith is my vice chair. Janelle and Martha have been chair and vice chair previously. John and David are our 2 executive board liaisons. Carol, Michael, Lewis, Jim have been tremendously wonderful and active and just really have made quite a difference in how we think about where we need to be going as a committee and what we recommend to the board for them to move forward. None of this could be possible without this particular team. Okay, so people ask often, what is my background? I know how to solve maybe a few chess puzzles. I can set up the board really well now, though. I know the queen goes on her color, and yeah, I can set up the board. However, I am a chess mom, and 2 of my 4 boys are involved with chess. One likes to play, and the other likes to tournament direct. And so I have gotten involved with chess in several ways. One is scorekeeping. Another is I've recently done some chess control work at some of the national tournaments. And I really enjoy our chess families, and I enjoy learning more about chess and getting more and more people involved. My own personal background as far as relationship to this committee, although I am hearing, I grew up in deaf community in New York. By training, I'm officially a cognitive neuroscientist. I work on language acquisition, literacy, and primary auditory cortex. Academic background is upstate New York, Connecticut, and St. Louis. In addition to research, I've done quite a bit of teaching, and classes I've taught are mostly in child and adolescent development, American Sign Language 1 and 2, comparative education as far as the theorists are concerned, intro psych, and then a few others. And then, of course, one of my favorite ones that I started teaching was actually the interaction of chess throughout history. So not the history of chess, but basically how chess has been a ribbon that has wound its way through history from pretty much the beginning of recorded time. My goal as chair of this committee, I think it's really important to listen to what the players want, what the TDs want, what the organizers want, what my colleagues want. I think it's important to discuss, learn from each other, and really focus on the academic model of collaboration and really help to enable the committee to serve the chess community. The vision and mission of the ASCC. The vision is short and sweet and actually backed by a lot of research as far as being the right way to go. And the vision for US chess is that all players, regardless of ability, can play together in safety, comfort, dignity, and fairness. And it's the ASCC that really says, okay, how do we help US chess with this vision and mission? The mission started out mostly over the board, but with COVID, we then had to add a new section for online play. So the over the board mission, which has remained the same throughout the past 5 to 10 years, is to increase awareness of participation opportunities in clubs, schools, local tournaments, US chess rated events, chess social events, and anything else chess related. Online has brought up some new challenges, and we need to think about ways to meet these challenges, both accessibility wise and inclusion wise for online play. Some is pretty easy and others are really almost impossible. And so communication ends up really being the key there. Okay. I like to bring out this particular graphic because I think it's important to see, and then I will explain it. Dr. Burns put this together in 2017. And if you look at our two people in the middle, if you look at the green one first, the social one, you'll see that here is a person with a disability, but she's fine. She looks like any other person, but there are all these environmental barriers. Whereas if you look at the traditional model or the medical model, you see that same person and all fingers point to her being a problem. Well, I don't know if that's really the way we want to go now. And so when we look at actually this medical or traditional model versus a social model of disability specifically to chess, what you find is that, again, that medical traditional model focuses on the problem, i.e. the individual. And if you can't fix the problem, you should isolate that individual from the typical group. It's a model. It has enjoyed its popularity for a number of years. It's kind of a pendulum swing. Sometimes that's the right model. Sometimes another one's the right model. At the moment, we're not leaning towards this being the right model. It has a significant number of negative effects, specifically in chess. If you only isolate an individual, then oftentimes you're creating a less competitive environment for them to play in. There's less opportunity to play up and learn from those opportunities. And then there becomes less interest, and there's a potential decrease for US chess in membership, not only just for US chess, but we don't ever want to lose anyone's interest in chess. Then you have the social model. And this really does focus on the fact that it's not the person, but that the environment that is inaccessible without help. And so then the solution becomes, okay, how do we find a reasonable accommodation? How do we make it so that we're not creating an inequity, but we're creating equal ground? Now, most of the time it can be done, but not always. And if it can't be done, then as long as we have respectful communication and we explain and discuss the reasoning with the player, well, they might withdraw from that particular tournament, but we should still be able to keep the player interested and engaged. So through accommodations and respect, we do not decrease membership. This is a hard topic to wrap our minds around, especially when you look at the logistics of it. It used to be the case, and in most earlier social models, it was the responsibility of the person without a disability to help the people who have a disability. And all of those accessibility guidelines used to focus on what should be done to break down barriers for people wanting and or needing accommodations. Most models either grow or disappear. And in this case, we're seeing a growth within the social modeling aspect. And we're finding that there's a newer focus on what should be done to break down barriers with people instead of for people wanting and or needing accommodations. And a large part of this has come from the fact that people with disabilities are more independent now. They have more of a voice now. They're not being ignored, and there is more respect. And so then that leads to the question of, what do players want? What do they need to get what they want accomplished? And what can tournament organizers and directors, for chess in particular, reasonably do? And so when you start talking about working with people, the word that has to come up right away is responsibility. Who should be responsible for what? This is something that we hadn't really discussed previously. It's something that we started to discuss, and we started coming up with this small list, and we're still working on this. So the responsibilities of a player who is requesting an accommodation is to understand that, first of all, chess rules do not get broken. So if you have a chess player who needs an accommodation of more time, it does not mean they get their pairing an hour before anybody else. They need to get their pairing when everyone else does, because otherwise there is an unfair advantage that happens. And two, accommodations allow fair and respectful play within the rules being used at the tournament. And by recognizing the responsibilities of both the player and the organizer and director, there's actually protection both for the players and the tournament staff, as well as for the game in particular. We have a rules committee. We have to keep our accommodations within the rules, otherwise it's a free-for-all. It's the player's responsibility to request the accommodation as soon as possible. If it's not requested in time, honestly, the organizer may not be able to make the accommodation happen, even if he or she really wants it to happen. Oftentimes with communication, it's better for someone to contact the organizer before they even sign up for the tournament. Hey, I would need this accommodation. Can you grant it? Can you make it happen? And if the organizer has enough time to say, yeah, I can do that, well, then the player can register, they can solidify what's needed, everything's there. And on the day of the tournament, there's no problem. Accommodations are mostly given before the tournament begins and or between games if possible, but they really can't be requested during a game in progress. Again, there are a whole bunch of other factors, but if you are a player who needs and or wants an accommodation, it has to be made known to the player with a disability that they have a responsibility to. The player has the responsibility of reaching out to the organizer and asking what is needed to go along with that accommodation request. For example, a doctor's note. This one has been one that we're working on as well, and I'll discuss it more a little later. The committee does not have jurisdiction to permit a TD to offer a behavioral intervention to a player during a chess tournament game. That's the responsibility of the tournament organizer. And as an advisory committee to the board on how we can get more people involved, we don't have that particular role. And this has come up whereby I had a player's parent called me during a tournament to complain that their child was being distracted by someone who has a disability who was sitting at a nearby board. There's nothing I can do in that regard. However, again, when the player and the tournament organizer and director work together and the responsibilities of the player are made clear, it kind of staves off many of the problems. chess is uniquely positioned to include players with disabilities, but this really only successfully happens with continued communication and when responsibility is followed through. And accommodations are best met when parents, players, TDs, and staff work together. Well, I just said what the players should do. What about an actual tournament that's following the ASCC guidelines? What are the responsibilities there? Again, understanding that the same thing, chess rules do not get broken, and accommodations allow fair and respectful play within the rules being used at the tournament. And again, this really does protect both the players and the staff. The responsibility of the tournament staff, if they're following the ASCC guidelines, is also to make sure that there is respect. You have to be respectful of the player, the requested accommodation, and the player's privacy. Sometimes the player wants complete privacy. Other times, typically the parent of a player will be able to say, well, it's not that I don't want anyone to know. I need the tournament director that's in charge of my child's section to know what's going on, such that if my child's blood sugar drops, they can help my kid. So I may not want the entire tournament to know, but there's a subset of people who I would want to know what needs to happen and why. So again, this communication is pretty important. Trying to get the accommodation clearly explained, understood, and put into effect as soon after it is requested as possible. It's really not beneficial for a player and or their family to hear, okay, well, we'll discuss it and let you know as the game starts. They might prepare differently based on whether they get the accommodation or whether they don't. And so it's really a good idea to keep the player informed of the progress and or difficulties in the process. Not every accommodation is able to be made at every time, but as long as the lines of communication are open, we stand a pretty good chance of making everyone comfortable. And finally, consulting the US Chess Accessibility Guidelines, asking for advisory help from the committee when needed, is something that a tournament that's following the ASCC guidelines is able to do. Again, I said it before, this one is the same for both player and tournament director and tournament. Chess is uniquely positioned to include players with disabilities, but this successfully happens only when with continued communication and when responsibility is followed through. Again, accommodations are best met when players, parents, TDs, and staff work together. Okay, so knowing that that's the background that we're kind of coming to this with, what has the committee been doing over this past year? I'm happy to say that despite COVID, we've been really active and meeting regularly and having wonderful discussions. Some of what we've done, specifically with the accessibility guidelines, we've updated it, well, with the online play issues. We've clarified guidelines for what relates to children versus adults. We've added a section on responsibilities. And we've had a few members of our committee who have said, well, how are we supposed to know what accommodations can be requested? So we're adding or building on an added section on available accommodations. For example, if the venue has door frames that are narrow and someone has a wheelchair that's too big to fit through, I don't know how much we can do there other than maybe seeing if the hotel has a scooter that the person can borrow, but making people aware of the fact that there might be a scooter that's an available accommodation that we can make, where wheelchairs can be placed, fixed boards, not fixed boards, wider path in between at the end of the section, a whole bunch of other available accommodations that we can typically easily do. But if you don't know what's available, it's harder to ask for it. This was this next one, again, happened just a few months ago. This took a lot of our mental effort and energy. We really together gave this a lot of thought. We responded to the referred motion 2118, which was proposed as saying, the US Chess Federation, US Chess, shall sanction and organize an annual national tournament of state champions of the disabled which offers an online option. All of us came to our table from different backgrounds on our committee and different disabilities, not disabilities, educational backgrounds. And we said, personal opinions aside, let's do a detailed analysis of this motion 2118, including the logistics. What does it mean? What would it encompass to make this happen? Okay, we also said, what about this motion as far as being assessed for, is it in line with the US Chess mission? Again, if the US Chess mission is inclusion, how does this fit into it? And the final response that we came up with was that, this is kind of what we sent into them as well, our committee feels strongly that organizers who want to host these events can absolutely do so. But US Chess should not be holding or sanctioning a national event such as what has been proposed. We are in agreement on this at this time, and we did not take this lightly. Okay, what else are we working on? We have a focus on involvement, and we're starting to really, again, reach out. We did start already, but it didn't go too far because of COVID. So again, we will ask TDs and organizers to try and use the accessibility guidelines and give us feedback on relevance, ease of use, and efficacy. Because honestly, we can create the best guidelines ever, but if the TDs are like, well, this is not what we need on the floor, and it's hard to use, then it doesn't matter what we created if it can't be used. So we really, really need this background so that we can revise based on real use the guidelines. The other thing that we're really kind of working on with involvement is, well, humans. Humans are a huge part of chess. And so whether it's playing, whether it's the venues that are selected for the tournaments, so networking, really talking with the venues, I mean, not the venues, a building doesn't typically talk, but the people who work at the venues and their staff, talking with the organizers and directors, talking with players, parents, and coaches, getting more involvement gives us more buy-in, if you will. And with more involvement and buy-in, we're also increasing communication. And it really does help us to both show that we're genuinely interested in making this accessible to everybody, as well as them helping us to help them. So that's been a huge push. One of the things that's currently under discussion, and we've talked about this before in different formats, and we're kind of now discussing it and figuring out the pluses and minuses of this format, is town hall type talks. Apparently those have been quite popular and well received in the chess community for other topics. Can we do it for accessibility issues? If we have like a 15-minute educational part, and then we open up the discussion to participants, maybe even have a real life story of what a participant has felt in the tournament situation, either a player, a TD, or a parent. And then following up with what the guidelines would say or suggest and seeing what the feedback is. That's another thing that we have that's currently under discussion. Also ongoing, this is a little bit on the back, not the back burner, but it's a little underspoken about at our meetings, but we're working on it. So there's the US Chess portal, and we have a database. The ASCC has a database of articles that are related to sports, competitive events, and people with disabilities. We have articles related to current social, legal, political viewpoints and proposed legislature, and also articles related specifically to chess and accessibility, including the Chess Life articles. So maintaining and adding to this database, we think is going to be important for US Chess. Continuing to work on the accessibility toolkit. Again, creating these guidelines and the toolkit that can be given to organizers and TDs is important, but in order for them to be truly helpful, they have to be user-friendly. So getting that feedback is going to help us help them. Propose future projects. We're still thinking about these and others. One is having a committee member who can be a liaison on other related committees. This one's pretty important because we don't operate in a vacuum. And so to be able to get feedback, for example, from TDs, what do they think about what we're proposing? Do they have better ideas? How can we listen to them and give them what they need? Having a committee member who's willing to look over the TLAs and other written material upon request to check for unintended offensive language, practices, and other accessibility issues. And finally, creating a situation where we have a committee member who can be the on-call accessibility liaison or moderator at tournaments upon request. This way, no organizer feels like they're completely floundering out there in the wind. These are not projects we're definitely doing, but these are ideas that we're thinking about, and we'll see if that's something the executive board is interested in us doing. So that's pretty much where we stand and what we've been working on. Again, this coming year, for me, and hopefully our committee as a whole, I really want our target word or thought to be involve. So of course I have my little graphic. I had this last year as well. Last year it was respect. This year it's involve. Initiate. Start good communication between players and tournament staff. It really helps with minimizing mishaps and miscommunication and grudges and grievances at the time. Networking, working with other organizations, and also working on accessibility issues together, apart, what works for them, what works for us. Voice, respecting players for their voice with accommodations for expressing their own opinions. Options, maintaining different avenues of engagement with chess. Not everyone is going to want to be the next Bobby Fischer or the next chess grandmaster. There's so much more we can do with chess at every level. Learning, teaching more about the social model of disability and where it's going now. It's when you've grown up learning that there's only one model of disability, turning your brain and your thoughts and your language towards a newer model can be really tough. And so the more we can learn and teach, I think the better it will be. Vote, working together as a committee. One is for us primarily, working together as a committee to present info and arrive at a compromise instead of a conclusion. Because we don't always have 100% agreement, and that's okay. I have a committee of really intelligent, caring people from different backgrounds, and we're not always going to agree 100% of the time. But I think we really do a good job of listening to each other, respecting each other, and arriving at a compromise. And finally, excitement, maintaining the can-do approach that we've had for the past 2 years and throughout the different chess roles, both for us and outside our committee. So, questions and discussion, your thoughts. And if you notice, there is a little picture of a dog in the corner. Her name is Rook, and hence she's in that corner square. And if there are no other questions, of course, I can talk about her. That is it for me.
Thank you, Stephanie. It looks like John Fernandez has a call. Go ahead, John. Oh, sorry.
Hi. Just Stephanie wanted to thank you for your hard work and leadership, and obviously Stephanie, Judith, Janelle, Martha, Michael, everybody involved, David, Carol, thank you so much for all your leadership. The one thing I do want to stress as well, and something that you only briefly touched on, was the kind of almost on-call service you've been providing to some of the events that have had issues come up, with very, very short notice, sometimes even same day, and trying to provide guidance to even very experienced tournament directors and organizers in terms of how to manage issues. And certainly just want to highlight that as something that the committee that has done that is above and beyond, but certainly something that really strives to achieve not just the charter of the committee itself, but also really just serve US Chess's mission in total. So thank you.
Our pleasure. Are there any other questions that I can answer?
Looks like Janelle is raising her hand. Go ahead and unmute Janelle.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. I know that Michael Agner put a lot of work into a pro and con for the discussion of the disability championship. And I really want to look at his work and slide if we have time and with the permission of the chair.
Okay, I will be more than happy to go through that. If it's okay with everyone, I'd like to wait and see if there aren't any other questions first,
Okay.
and then I will be more than happy to show those. Any other questions? Okay, if it's okay, then I will go right down to those. Oh. I want to do it. Okay, so first, here we go, pros. When we were going through the motion, we wanted information, we wanted people's thoughts, we wanted a starting point for discussion. And Michael, one of our committee members, new to us this year, gracefully, and we were grateful for his contribution, came up with a list of pros and cons for us to start talking from. And so on the pro side, there was this idea that if we do have a tournament like this, it might create new or more opportunities for play. Because right now, few exist, or then few existed as independent tournaments. Maybe it would be a supportive atmosphere, which could be great. Of course, that is if there are enough trained people, but in theory, there are a helpful staff for players with disabilities. Awesome. Again, we would hopefully be able to find enough people to staff it. Meet other players with disabilities if people register and play. Now, again, that's kind of a tough one. The Blind Championship has only gotten 1 to 12 players for most of the recent past, and the really well-publicized first annual North American Chess Cup for youth with disabilities got less than 15 players. And so it kind of becomes a question of what the best way is to do that. Visibility in media. Again, that's a mixed bag. It's a pro if it focuses on the chess part. Compete. Hey, the more opportunity for competition, the better. Possibly the case. Lack of such a tournament could be considered an incidence of non-inclusivity. Maybe, I mean, people can look at things different ways. So these were the pros that we came up with. And in theory, some of them really could be pros. So Michael did a good job with that list. And then he also did a good job with cons. The first one is attendance. Will there be enough players to create a competitive environment? Is the cost of attendance a limiting factor? Again, I said before, the Blind Championship has gotten less than a dozen players for most of the recent past. And the annual North American Chess Cup, I think, may even have been canceled. I'm not 100% sure, but I didn't see it rated. And I know that one of the players played in another tournament that weekend who had been previously registered. The Deaf Chess Championship got such low numbers, it was discontinued. And so even with good publicity, even with many of these tournaments having funding to help players with travel and accommodations, we still just couldn't get enough attendance. Another con is, well, is it one section or categories? What are these competitive groups based on? Legally blind, paralysis, epilepsy, amputee, leg in a cast, elderly, mild versus severe autism, ADHD. What actually counts as a disability for this type of tournament? Does it make a difference if they were born with a disability or they had a life-changing event when older? Do those count the same way? What about multiple medical conditions that actually really can create true challenges for players, staff, and families? What about the idea of document or proof versus privacy? How do we guarantee that the spotlight is on chess and not on disabilities? Funding, can we get the funding, as these tournaments tend to be more expensive to organize and run? And of course, one of the biggest cons is, does it go against inclusivity, which is one of the missions of US Chess? So Michael put together these two lists of pros and cons, and they were wonderful. And most of us were able to argue for and against every single one of these. So really what we ended up doing was we ended up putting together a list of, well, concerns, I guess. So if you create an annual national championship of scholastic or not scholastic players with disabilities, you have the US Chess mission, which has a focus on inclusivity and accommodations. And this tournament, it's been pointed out by several of our committee members and many others, definitely has that focus on separate. Logistical concerns. How are players selected to compete or play? US Chess doesn't collect data on players' identification of a disability. And there's no top 100 list for players with a disability. Does the selection process have to be uniform across the states? What about finding enough trained staff? How do we do that? Will we be able to make and meet the accommodations? What do you do if you can't? And then finally, does it end up being a burden on the individual states, one that they really can't overcome? This type of tournament could be really hard on small organizers. And what about the timing of a possible qualifying tournament? When do you do that? And so the pros and cons help to create this overall way of us thinking and wondering, what do we do here? And it definitely became tricky. And so that was why we opted at this point to not advocate for this tournament to be sponsored by US Chess. If an individual organizer wants to do it, we would never stop them. The pros are pros, but it's not appropriate and within the line and mission at this point of US Chess. And we were very grateful for Michael's work on this and the committee's overall interest in being able to look at this objectively and from a research-based point of view. Any other questions? John, I don't know if David's on as well. As our board liaisons, do you guys have any questions or constructive criticism or anything you want us to go towards in the future?
I can see David hiding in the corner over there. If you expand it out, I think it's obviously been a complicated year, certainly with everything, for lack of a better term, but certainly, think this has been, one of the most well-functioning committees that's really been meeting, their charter that I'm involved with, and appreciate that greatly. And obviously this is a challenging topic, one that's certainly fast moving. And, I think we all hope for life to be somewhat more normal in the coming year or so, but obviously that should also be linked to more individuals playing and more events, which will create more real opportunities. I like to think of them that way versus challenges to really, get our mission out there and, really make sure that chess can be as inclusive as possible. But thank you again.
I don't have anything to add to that other than John said it all. So that's great.
Sorry for stealing it, David.
Jim, I think Jim has a question. Carol, how do we do this? Okay.
I asked him to unmute.
Hi, and thanks, Stephanie. Thanks everybody for being here, working on this, etc. My question, I'm not sure this is the right venue to pose this, but I want to get the question out since it definitely is inseparably linked to accessibility, and I think probably deals with the question of inclusivity, and that is what would be the most productive way for, let's say, the U.S. Blind Chess Association to interface with U.S. Chess in order to create venues for online competitions. Specifically, make the U.S. Blind National Championship an online event as opposed to an in-person. When we tried it in 2020, I had 20 entries within 12 hours of an ill-begotten misunderstanding that we had a tournament director who was prepared, willing, and able to run an online tournament. I posted to the blind population at large an invitation to participate, and I had 20 responses within 12 hours. So go ahead.
Jim, this is Carol with US Chess. I think we can have this conversation offline, but
Sure.
in anticipation of a question along these lines, I did reach out to our national events director, Boyd Reed, and asked him about his assessment of what can and should be done. And I think he is very open to having an online national championship event for this community. So I think your question is well timed, and the board has, at least during COVID, was very flexible with allowing certain or all national championships during that time to go online, simply because there wasn't the ability to hold them at OTB. But with the population we're talking about, it may just be better to move it online altogether. So I think that's a conversation worth having. And my understanding is that there are not any current bids for the event this year. So again, your timing is really good.
Jim, this is Stephanie. Because of your concern that you raised on Friday, and I told you that I did not think that US Chess was going to do away with the national event. I don't like to talk without knowing what I'm talking about. And so Carol and I did speak about that after Friday and before this meeting, so that you could have a better answer that came from someone above me.
And what would be the most expeditious, because I'm getting inquiries from membership. Is there going to be an OTB tournament? Has anybody put in a bid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? What would be the most expeditious way?
Yeah, there has not been a bid for the next edition of this event.
Sure.
So I think if you know somebody who might be interested in running an online tournament, as you suggested, I think Boyd would be open to receiving a bid for the event, so it's allowed to go on. And what I can do, Jim, is I will make an email introduction to you and Boyd so that you can communicate directly, and he can send in the bidding guidelines for that.
Okay, perfect.
And of course, if you ever need me as an intermediary, I will be more than, this is Stephanie again, I'll be more than happy to help move things along.
Super, thanks.
Anything else? If not, I will be more than happy to say that just like our monthly meetings, which we try to keep at the 1 hour or slightly less mark, we did it again. We did it again. Carol, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, just want to thank everybody for coming tonight and for your contributions all throughout the year. You know, this committee really is a bright spot for US Chess and all the work that you've done, and the education that you've done. And I look forward to the next year as you continue to do that outreach to others across the Federation, as Stephanie described earlier this evening. So thank you, and keep up the great work.
Thank you.
With that, I'm going to stop our recording.